All right, so who wants to begin?
I can start with the ancient history. The year is like 1968 or 1969. And after having been told that I was a lesbian by a gay male, and I wondered about that for a year or so. And then for reasons unknown to me, I went off to Houston, Texas to try and find out about this. Went down and got a job, and then I moved down there. And was living in this apartment complex, and we talk about in the straight world in the late 60s, early 70s, when it was all about NASA and oil in Houston. And if it wasn't a macho world, I don't know what was. And so I was down there for 6 months or so before I finally changed jobs and found someone there whom I thought might be a lesbian, and then kind of started dropping some hints. And then she helped me, and then she ended up taking me out and to the bars. Not out on dates, but taking me to bars. And that's where I first came up when I was working with her with the term butch, because she had what she referred to as her work clothes, her family clothes, and her butch clothes in her closet, and I had no clue. So as time went on, then I found out what this term was and what it meant. And then eventually I moved a year or so later back to Chicago and to Rockford. And it was kind of a factory town, actually, Rockford is. So there was sort of a butch and femme concept there. And then in the very early 70s, we started working on the Equal Rights Amendment. And there was a huge backlash about lesbian involvement in the effort to get the Equal Rights Amendment passed. And since there were lesbians involved, then therefore it was not worth anything. That there was no, it didn't mean anything. It was just a bunch of quote unquote bra-burning lesbians trying to get. So I joined people who were working on that, who were mostly straight housewives, and I found other lesbians at the time also working on this. And we really sort of started trying to get away from our stereotype images because we were trying to get the legislation passed. So in the process over the years, and I don't know whether it's because I'm a snob or whether it just happened, but we really did drop the term butch and femme, and I have never used it very much, and nor have any of my acquaintances until recently, when I realized that it's out there again now, and there's even something called the futch.
Yep.
The futch. There's something called the futch scale that tells you where you are on the. And I've got to look that up. I got to find out more about that. But that's how I came to it. That's where I am with it now. I see it being used more now, I guess, and I'm more comfortable with it than I used to be. But I think that you limit yourself. If you describe yourself as a butch or femme, you're limiting yourself in terms of partnership to half of the lesbian nation population.
Marty, did you identify as butch at any time?
Yeah, I guess. Briefly for a while after I left Houston and moved home, and when I first went to Rockford, I was still trying to sort that out. I'm not certain that I ever really have completely sorted it out. It again is I guess your dress has something to do with it. Your attitude has something to do with it. It is much more to me than things that are just going on in the bed, although that has something to do with it too, and can in many instances mean a lot. Partnerships are equal as much as possible, but that doesn't mean that there isn't some difference. I don't know if that answered your question, Karen.
Yeah.
I only stopped wearing this, the bolo tie. My uniform since the early 70s has been a blazer and jeans and probably penny loafers. And that never changed. And that's what I called the wishy-washy liberal uniform, and was worn by both the more butch and the more feminine, if you will, in appearance of the wishy-washy liberal lesbians, and and straight women too, for that matter. It's only been and I don't know why, in the last 8 or 10 years that they've sort of adopted the bolo tie as kind of a little trademark, and I can't explain why I have done that either. But I have, if I don't identify myself as a butch, straight people have for almost my entire life. Out someplace, even on the street, in the store, getting into a road rage issue or something, inevitably, especially if it's a male, boom, one of the first things out of his mouth was, all right, dyke. And so obviously my appearance is that of the butch lesbian, and I guess always has been. And I don't know if it comes from being an Illinois farm girl. I'm very much a tomboy, and dressing up like cowboys as a kid. I've never gotten over that. What's anybody else got to say for themselves?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I kind of resonate with what you were saying about it's like a term given to me versus one I've kind of adopted and be like, that makes sense. But I feel like there's like two coming out phases for me. It's that, oh, that's what that means. That's like middle school, so let's say 2012-ish. And then there's like the, oh, I can go out in the world now and not care what people think. And it's never really been in my lexicon. It's never really been a term I've identified with. But actually thinking about the topic, I feel like it's because I didn't really want to be out in Texas and stuff like that. And a term like that, I think I had a lot of fear around and now that I'm just kind of living how I want to live, I don't think about it. I just kind of exist how I want to exist. And I feel like now the way you dress and express yourself is more connected to how people interpret your gender expression than it isn't maybe a sexuality expression now, at least when I interpret it. So yeah, I don't think about it in the same way, I guess.
You know, I until recently also was really hung up on this concept. I guess I don't know what else we were supposed to use as role models, but I was really hung up on the concept that we as quote unquote gay people had molded ourselves in the image of the straight society, and that we were even attaching their labels to ourselves. Mm-hmm. So much so that only in the last couple of years have I been able to comfortably use the term for other people's spouses as husband and wife. I even found those to be offensive, frankly. And it's taken me a long time to get over that.
You had a hard time using that term for straight people or for gay people?
For gay people.
Yeah.
For gay people. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I thought we were trying to act too much like straight people when we were using those terms. Mm-hmm. And but it was pointed out to me that how else do you let someone third party know that it is an LGBT relationship if you don't use that term husband or wife? Spouse doesn't say anything. It doesn't tell them that you're gay or that you're in a gay relationship. And so I finally come to say, well, yeah, that's right. You're right, yeah. And so now I'm comfortable with it.
That's interesting because, my partner and I, I started coming out to myself in 1995, 1996. And I think between 96 and 2000 was my real coming to terms, figuring out who I was. And I can talk more about that later, but in terms of the marriage thing, my partner and I have now been together 21 years, I think, and we got married. And even that, was really, I think a lot of our friends didn't understand that. And we had to get married several times because, well, we were domestic partnered and that was for health benefits. And then we were domestic partner in another state for health benefits. Then we got married and that was for legal benefits. And we had kids, but that was invalidated in California. So then, these sorts of things. But what you're saying, Marty, about husband and wife, I've never been able to use it and I never want to use it. It just doesn't feel right. Like I say partner still, which is what I kind of from my foundational time figuring out who I was in this community, what people would say. So I know it's confusing to people. And I know some people use husband and wife more for straight people. So they understand, like you said, the relationship, but it just feels, I can't do it.
I have many acquaintances who are offended if you don't use the term husband or wife for their spouse. And I have come, and they've called me out on it, And so, well, okay, it's not worth, having you get all upset about it. Okay, I'm getting used to it and I'm doing it. And but I still prefer the term partner. And I go back a long ways, and I regret the loss of the word lover from our vocabulary. Boy, does that say everything that needs to be said.
That's a word in my vocabulary.
That's a word in your vocabulary? Yeah, you're right. The lover one's a really good.
It was a common term in the 70s. This is my lover. and this is what gay people said. And then now, unfortunately, we've digressed even to using the term fiance, which is again from the straight vocabulary. And but I really miss the use of the word lover. I think it's a great word, and I try and use it, or try and get it back whenever I can.
Kathleen, you mentioned the lovers in your vocabulary. Tell us more, and also tell us kind of when you started to think about your own sexuality and around Butch. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I really like the word lover. I mean, I feel like it encompasses a lot of different like shapes of relationships and stuff, and it's just a sweet word. So I think I first kind of realized I wasn't straight in like junior year of high school, like maybe 2014 or 2015. And then that summer, I kind of like came out as pansexual and identified as that for a while, really until the summer of 2019, when I dated this femme lesbian. And like we got talking about like, because she identifies like as femme, and we like got talking about lesbian identity and like butch and femme and things like that. I think it was like through my conversations with her, I realized like, oh no, I don't actually like men at all. I'm just a lesbian.
What do you feel like your relationship is now or has been with the word?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because before this past summer, I really didn't have any sort of relationship or opinion with the word. It wasn't really used that much. I didn't really think about it. I feel like I haven't seen a lot of like butch representation, like seen or heard it. I think I didn't really think much of it because the only butch representation I'd seen in media was like gay women in like ill-fitted suits, which like didn't interest me. And like that's just the image I had of like what butch is, when like that's not really, or that's not all of it. And so yeah, it's like a pretty new relationship through this person, dating and like learning about that term and stuff. I don't know, I worry I'm like a bit like overzealous about it, but I'm like really glad I like have that term and like I identify it with it really strongly now. I feel like it gives me like a different kind of beauty, or like a different kind of like strength that I feel more comfortable with. And I like having like a word for it. So I think it's like a positive relationship. I really like the term.
So let me recap in terms of people's periods of time of kind of coming to terms with who we are. Kathleen and Lawson, you're pretty similar, right? Like 2012 to 2014 and beyond a little bit. Is that right? And then Marty, tell me again the years in terms of the foundational.
You got to make me say it again, do you? Yeah. All right. 1969.
That was my guess. Okay. All right. So and then for me, it's 1996, 1997. Because I think, with any of these, I think for a huge part of that is I feel like maybe we carry a lot of when we, in those foundational moments, then, what was going on and what we made to think about it. So I'm wondering, like, what is butch? What do you think of when you think of butch, or what is butch to you? Because Kathleen mentioned like beauty and strength. What do others think of?
Well, so another really influential thing was this essay by Carol Queen I think it's called Why I Love Butch Women. It's a very sexy essay. I like it a lot. But basically, like in it, she articulates that one of like the core elements of butch is like eroticism and then also strength. And I feel like for me, like that's what butch is. It's like eroticism, it's a strength, it's like a different kind, it's like beautiful, it's just like a different kind of beauty. It's not like a feminine beauty, it's more of like a handsome beauty. Butch is beautiful, but it's not a kind of beauty that maybe relies on like a certain physique or figure or that sort of thing. So I think butch is perhaps a little bit less in appearance and more in like attitude and how you carry yourself, and also how you identify yourself, because you can be like a plenty like masculine lesbian and not identify as butch. I think it's like it is like a choice and an act to like identify as butch or femme. And then also I think for a while I kind of thought of femme and butch as like opposites. But my femme friend that I dated this summer, she sees them more as like counterparts, which like I kind of like that idea more, even though I mostly date more butch people than femme people. So I don't really see it as like I think some people see it as like, oh, it's just like lesbians recreating like heterosexual binaries, which I guess that's kind of what it can look like on the surface, but not what it is for me.
I'm curious because Lawson and Kathleen, like, have you were saying that you've heard of butch some, but is it, I get a sense maybe your generation that butch is not as common a term as maybe it might have been for me or Marty at different times.
Yeah, I really didn't hear the term much at all. Just like in the general lesbian representation I've seen, I feel like the more mainstream lesbian representation I've seen is more like feminine lesbians. And that could be like a variety of reasons, but I think that might be part of like trying to integrate with heterosexual society. So it's like lesbians can be pretty, they're women, they can be pretty women too. They can't be like cool and like fuck.
I see it as a negative, pretty much. Still, I think I see butch and femme as being, again, labels that are straight, that we have adopted and are still using. And I guess it's like the word queer, which is sort of reappearing and is okay now. And so butch and femme are sort of okay now too. But I think the concept of butch to me is either people who are compelled to be in control or appear to be in control emotionally. And then there is the whole issue of sex and why people are the way they are, and whether or not some of that has to do with a lack of being able to show vulnerability. And if you are theoretically the top, you don't have this sexual vulnerability that comes with being the recipient of penetration. And that can be a control issue. That can be something that just evolved and it's how you are. So you get all kinds of stuff going on. And it's makes it really hard to describe to me exactly what it is or how people are or why they are the way they are.
It's interesting because, you know, this topic came up a little bit in one of our discussions. And you'll remember, Marty, because you and I were kind of speaking to it. And someone else in our group, I think, was wondering about butch and femme being problematic and passe. And it's interesting because I was surprised, but I found myself really like coming out in defense of butch femme. And I think part of that is really like the moment that I really came to figure out kind of who I was. So to me, butch femme, at least in my experience, has been a really positive thing. And I have found with my students, like my college age students over the last several years, that they don't see it like that usually. Do you know what I mean? You know, I came out, I look kind of like I do now with longer hair. But then when I came out in like 1996, 1997, at least for me coming out in North Carolina, it was scary. This is before like Ellen DeGeneres, before Melissa Etheridge, anybody was out. And I was in like this small area of North Carolina, and I was kind of realizing this about myself after falling in love with my one of my friends in college, and you know, trying to kind of figure out who you are. And so I would go like to the gay clubs, like small bars and clubs in North Carolina, and that's I think where I first really started encountering butch. But I didn't have a word for it. I didn't know people called it butch. But as I thought back, you know, I have never ever dated or slept with anyone who was not butch. Like, identified, you know, I'm like anybody. So then, you know, I kind of really dated, you know, a bunch of women. They were all pretty butch, and I thought that was pretty hot. I still find butch like super attractive. And so then I moved to California for grad school, and I still had some friends I'd known for a long time saying like, you sure you really want to do this? You know, go back, don't be gay and stuff. And so it's really trying to figure out like who I am. And I think butch women to me, I both was attracted to them so much, but I admired them so much because in a time when all of us were scared, it really takes a lot of guts to walk around to me being very outwardly a gay woman. And that to me, to me, butch, especially in the 90s, to me was brave, was visible when many of us were afraid to be, was true to themselves. It was also a political thing. Really, it was a political thing, I think, to be very outwardly butch in the 90s. And I think there have been different waves of butch, you know, because I know, Marty, you were interested in, you were talking about the 60s. Then I know with second wave feminism, like in the 70s, there was a real turn against butch, especially in the lesbian communities. So like Daughters of Bilitis, all of that stuff was totally anti-butch femme. So I think in the 80s, 90s, it kind of came back for a while. And at that moment, to me, butch women gave me hope, and they inspired me. And I also found it really hot that they were willing to be that out and that like not giving a shit what other people thought. And they would get shit from people all the time. But then as I was going through this, at some point I decided I want to cut my hair short. And this was actually, I was going for more like a Winona Ryder at the time look. It was like a pixie cut we're really in. So I went and got a pixie cut, and I didn't realize with my facial structure and everything, that doesn't work on me. And so it ended up being super butch. So then I was like, I'm gonna go with it, because I was still figuring out who I was. So I had a butch face for like a year and a half. And I think I was really trying to work out, could I be a lesbian but look like this? Or does lesbian mean I need to be butch? And so I think for me, I really felt like I wasn't, you know, I'm not gay enough if I look like I look, you know? And so I went with it. I had a chain that connected my wallet to my, you know, jeans. I wore black lace-up military combat boots.
So you were Kathleen?
I was Kathleen!
I don't have the chain on me right now, but
Yeah,
But my hair was even shorter.
Cowboy boots was as close as I ever got, you know, and I am proud to say I've never owned a pair of Birkenstock.
I'm
That's
surprised,
powerful.
Marty.
Huh?
That's powerful.
Yeah.
I'm surprised, but yeah, to me, so I tried that on. People thought I was dating my best friend, which we both thought was funny. And then over time, I realized somehow, and I think it was really through Butches that I realized I could be a lesbian and be myself and not recreate myself. And I could be femme. And I never felt like you had to be butch or femme. I felt like they were two choices among a bunch. But like when I was in San Francisco, like in the late 90s, that was really a big moment of drag king culture. So we were really involved in all of that. So you had all these butches who were dressing up and, you know, these sorts of things. So like Marty, when I met you, I just immediately, you read to me as butch, which of course I liked. You know? So then it's interesting to me to hear that you don't think of yourself like that. Because then I'm like, oh.
You know, I still wonder if at times if the rejection of the terms butch and femme, and if it's not based in classism, and if it doesn't reflect a certain amount of snobism on my part for having gotten into that. And I still ask myself that. You know, Gloria Steinem will tell us that the now has been very actively involved in LGBT equality issues, and well, they came to the table really late. Thank you very much. They were involved in the Equal Rights Amendment. They were involved in civil rights movement for African Americans, but they were really slow getting to the table as far as the LGBT issues were concerned. And I think it was only when they finally realized that they were losing a lot of lesbian membership that they finally started coming around, and money does indeed talk. So I do worry about the concept of the snob appeal of it, because in fact, in my experience, in my lifetime, the butch-femme relationship and the emphasis on it has been much stronger in the working class community. Mm-hmm. And so the question is then, you know, where does that put us now, and where do we go with it? And I mean, I don't really know. And I want to ask Kathleen and Lawson both of this, and that's kind of putting you on the spot. But when we first started, I think you've changed in the 9 months. Okay. And I have said in our last meeting last week that I wanted to see all the young people in 5 years, because I don't think you are who you are yet, who you're going to be yet. And I think you both have changed. I have seen you become more involved, more outspoken, and more self-confident, I think. And I don't think either of you was identifying necessarily, from what I heard when we first met and we first started having our meetings, that there was an orientation of any kind that either of you were declaring, lesbian or other, or any of the other ones for that matter. And so I'd kind of be interested to hear you reflect on whether or not you think, either of you, that you have seen any difference in the last, say, 8 or 9 months since starting the group.
I mean, I think I have. I mean, I think it was kind of like a cascade of events of like me dating that person this summer and having all these conversations, and then also being a part of this group, and then also doing metal work. I think that was kind of like a combination of things that I feel like changed me a lot. I'm trying to think like the impact of this group not necessarily like didn't like make me want to, or I think I just like I want to look really gay. And I feel like being butch, that is a way to be read as very gay in a way that like bothers straight people a lot. But I think like I have changed a lot within these past 9 months or so.
Well, you answered it, Kathleen, before a little bit. Maybe it was in your bio or somewhere that you said that earlier this year or sometime you really were seeing yourself as gay, and that you had changed more to seeing yourself, number one, as lesbian, and then number two, you really are using the term dyke, which often it goes for me with butch in terms of how it's been used.
Yeah.
Lawson?
I feel like interestingly enough,
yeah,
that is A-okay, Marty. I think I kind of went the opposite way, where I think just seeing so many people just living their life. And I think I put a lot less stock now on even figuring out a label, I guess. And I think even joining the group was a big step for me. And even I think before I was trying to ignore it and not have to deal with it and not have to be out. Like I remember one time in the cafeteria, like freshman year, God knows what I was wearing, probably some button up and jeans. And I just walked up to some friends and one of them commented, I'm like, wow, Lawson, looking very butch today. And I just like froze, like so much fear just entered my body. Like, what on earth? Why would you say that? Almost like fight or flight, like, oh no. And then I was like, wait, that's okay. That's fine. Yes, you are. Funny. You have an outward appearance and it says something and you can't ignore it. And I think I've just gotten better at being, this is how I feel comfortable. I don't need to have a label for it, but I'm okay with however I'm kind of, I guess, perceived.
Do you both feel wherever it is that you are, a little more confident or comfortable in your skins than you were, say, a year ago?
Yeah.
Definitely.
I've never felt like pressured at all to identify as butch or femme or even participate in that kind of dialogue, but I have liked it. I kind of have like an opposite experience to like your reaction to being called butch. I think this was like early on in our conversations about this topic. Me and this person I dated this summer, I wrote this story down. I think she was like texting me at one point, and I think I was talking about the idea of butchness initially, maybe thinking about applying it to myself. And she said, I'm a very butch lover. And I always made her feel very safe and precious. And I like nearly cried when she said that. So it was like a really positive, like affirming experience or term to be used that I feel like put like language to something I had been feeling.
I have two thoughts. First, I'm just interested. I want to ask like Marty and Lawson a little more, because both of you have talked about being more outwardly identified by others as butch necessarily versus maybe identifying yourselves. And I'm wondering like how that feels, because that's something I haven't, because if anything, I've always been kind of jealous of butches, because like my partner, I don't know, it's funny, I was like gonna ask her today, do you identify as butch? But then I was like, I couldn't, because I'm like, that's so weird, because I don't know, like, but I've always been jealous.
After 20 years or something, you can't ask me. Come on.
I mean, you've seen her, like she has, I don't know, like, you know what, actually, one thing that makes us sometimes a little creeped out is if we're out traveling somewhere several times this last summer, people have thought she was my son or a younger brother, because she's the type of like soft butch, like she's the type of like soft butch that I don't know for you all, but I like sometimes. But see, she and other of my friends that look lesbian, like they get recognition from other people on the street. Like, I don't know if this has happened with any of you, and this has always been.
head nod.
Somewhere we see the head, the chin up, right? And so she'll get that. I never get it. Like, I'm all like, hey, like.
I alluded to this earlier, and it's a lifelong thing with me. I had long hair when I was in high school and for a year or so afterwards. And unless I had grown the long hair back again, I look like I look, and it's been a lifelong issue. And through the 60s and 70s and 80s and even 90s, it was not necessarily always a good issue. And I do not even begin to try and suggest that I have any concept of what being an African American is like, but they can't hide who they are. Okay. And that's one of the things that's always been said about gay people, is that you can hide who you are. Your appearance doesn't necessarily give you up. But in many cases it does, and I've had a number of unpleasant encounters over the years because of the way I looked, but refused to hide, I guess. And I'm not sure that was necessarily brave, as it just was stubborn.
I think it's kind of interesting. I actually haven't really gotten harassed at all for my appearance. And I think especially in my blacksmithing class, being very butch and being in full PPE and everything, I was able to kind of fly under the radar and not be judged so much as a woman. Yeah, I mean, I think I think constantly about that person I dated this summer. Her name's Aubrey, by the way. She had stopped writing the CTA because she gets harassed constantly because she's very feminine and she gets read as straight and she's beautiful. And so I ended up having to ride the CTA with her to bring her back home because no one bothers me on public transit, and I get absurd, especially when I'm with her. People call me he. And I don't know, I'm glad I can help protect her or deflect attention by looking like a boy.
See, that's part of what I love about the whole idea of, I guess, to me, butch, it can be so many different things.
Yeah.
We're talking about, it's not one thing, right? But it's something to me about this outward to the public, some sort of toughness in your faceness and willing to be oneself, even if that can mean uncomfortableness or something. And it's the bending of boundaries and rules and these sorts of stuff. It's the playing with it. It's the very much, part of butch to me is very much being a woman. And that's what's fun. It's playing with what it means to be a woman. So the butch women I've known, are really butch, but they're really very womanly, and and whatever that means. And actually one thing that I guess was surprised about at first, and then maybe disappointed a little, but then maybe, interested, was this idea that Marty was bringing up, both in terms of what sometimes people would think of how butch then relates to how one is in bed or sexually or these sorts of things. And, there's this idea of stone butch, or is this idea that person doesn't receive at all, right? But to me, something that attracted me so much about butch women is how strong and tough and brave, and also, yeah, how they made me feel somehow lovely and desirable and something. And then I would find out, wait a second, that doesn't always really translate into the intimate sphere. And there, you may have heard it, but there's a term that a lot of people would use. It's called butch in the streets, femme in the sheets.
In the streets.
There's a lot of butch women that are like this. And I was and I know a lot of people find it very appealing. And I'm kind of wait, what?
I think it's interesting that at least in my experience of butch and femme, it hasn't really, in how I've encountered it and how people I've talked to feel about it, it doesn't necessarily connotate sexual position to them. I think the idea of butch bottoms is very much a thing. And I think also, I personally don't think a lot of butches, or not all butches, are emotionally unavailable.
No, my experience, I found butches to be much more emotionally vulnerable and open than femmes. It's this whole mixture of, I guess it's a stereotype that I've heard many people say, but the idea is this tough exterior and this very
marshmallowy interior.
Which sometimes I'm what? It's false advertising. But Marty, then did you ever identify as butch except in the beginning when somebody told you were?
Initially, I guess I didn't know any better. I didn't know. My first lover was, I've talked about her being in Houston, her being, in addition to being certifiably crazy, and had been institutionalized on a couple of occasions, I found out later, but was feminine, but butch, if you will. She was short, so therefore short people get away with a lot of stuff. You know what I mean? I mean, they can just be whatever they want to be. They can, and there I was at all in my 5'9" or 5'10"ish. And so my first relationship with her was, in terms of sex, was that I was not the butch. I didn't get it for a while. And it wasn't until I came back and started living in Rockford and people started defining it for me and telling me who it was that I was and who I should be going out with and who it was that were being attracted to me in bars. And so, okay, well, now I've got to do this, And so that's in fact what I did until I finally, in the mid-1970s, early 1970s, 73, 74, got into a relationship which I guess physically, certainly I was the more butch in appearance and she had long hair, but it was an equal relationship that we had, emotionally at least, in terms of how the relationship worked. And that doesn't necessarily mean the sex of it, but how we worked as partners, and that it was an equal relationship, and we knew it, and everyone we knew it. And it didn't matter who drove to the party and who drove home. And in some circles and in some time zones in my life, that would have been a very, very important thing. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, Karen, or not.
I don't even remember what it was, but I love what you said, so we're good.
I feel like sometimes with like stereotypes, what a femme-butch relationship is, I think there's this understanding that because they appear or act very different, it's like an unequal relationship. Mm-hmm. But I think like simply appearance or like attitude doesn't necessarily mean like an unequal relationship. I don't know. I really want to like defend butch and femme.
I do
a
too.
lot.
I mean, and then I think too, we talked about, Kathleen, I think you were talking about it, that there's been historically and even now very little popular representations of butches, right? So I guess then you think of these ideas. I mean, there's like, I think Orange is the New Black. What's her name? Leah Delaria. Her character, I think, was kind of like groundbreaking as someone who's, really playing like, a butch lesbian that is a butch lesbian's idea of a butch lesbian, or something. But what's interesting me is for all three of you, the word butch has been put on you. And then it's kind of what you then did with it. And that's really interesting to me. I don't know why. And maybe that's also why I was nervous to ask my partner of over 20 years if she identifies as butch, is like maybe I'm reading people as butch because I want to. And it seems like maybe it's a much more conflictive, possibly, relationship with it when you're having it put on you. People call you that or identify you that, and you're not sure. You're either not sure how you feel about that, or maybe that's not how you see yourself. I don't know, Lawson, is that you brought up being called butch once? Like, has it come up other times, or?
Not really. I think I get more so the accidental sir situation, like you're getting a food made and then just like kind of doing it and you're like, yes sir, blah, 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 and you get down the line, they look up and like, oh, eat, and just keep going.
Right.
It's really fine.
Just make the burrito.
Yeah. But that was like the main time that like stuck in my memory. But I also attribute it more so to, I think, just the time in my life too, of finally being like, can I wear this? Can I not wear this? And nobody cares. I guess what you were saying of how like you kind of wear your like gayness on a sleeve if you're butch. To play devil's advocate, I don't know if that's even what you'd call it. I think in some ways it can be less brave even, because all I have to do is just wear what I want to wear and go out in the world and live my life. Where like I know like Karen, you've talked about how you make it a point to like tell people, and that notion of always coming out because you're not getting the head nod on the sidewalk. So I do appreciate my ability to have that sort of fluidity of being like perceived as part of XYZ community and being able to enter it, but also not, I guess.
You know, one of the things that I really regret about getting older is that I find that I am really, really, really jealous of young people and their ability to carry off the androgynous look. I really, and how they're really working at it, a lot of them, and I just find it great fun, and I certainly would be trying to do that if it were back in the day. I would be doing what I could to try and carry that off. Although physical size has always been a betrayal. Not a big bone woman, but just being tall has always been a giveaway, I guess.
Marty, don't you kind of carry off the androgynous look now? I'm so confused by it. Like, you have like a bolo, but you have earrings. Like.
Thank you.
But yeah, Lawson knows I've talked about, in other times, I just get very frustrated. I pass, and especially, and, I don't get any of that kind of recognition. And that's frustrating, to me. And as I may have told some of you all, I have kids now. So they're 9 and 11. And I learned early on, once our friend network or social network, because of the kids, expanded to other parents, the majority of those are going to be straight parents, right? They're public school down the street, these sorts of things. And I learned pretty early on then that it was important too to always make sure that I came out in the first conversation I ever had with other parents. Not even because I really needed them to know that, but if they started to get to know us better or they heard from other people, eventually they would find out, and then they would feel all weird that they had assumed or something. And it was like to just prevent weirdness later. Or people will always say to me when my kids were younger on the playground, I ask them about my husband, and I'd always, that's the one time I would use the word wife, because I would be like that to make it make sense to them, But it's funny, Lawson, because in terms of being more brave, I still, though, don't have to worry about people looking, judging me or looking at me funny on the train or something. Whereas somebody that's dressed in a different way is going to.
The other thing is too, when we start talking about the fact that we're seeing more and more quote unquote LGBT representation in advertising. But then again, no, we're not. What we're seeing in advertising is 2 female, feminine looking women. And that's who's doing the advertising. It's supposed to be aimed at the gay community. Mm-hmm. Unless it's in a gay publication.
Right.
But on TV or in mainstream media, anything you see, it is 2 quote unquote feminine appearing women.
Maybe sometimes they'll put one of them.
They never really say anything about them and their relationship necessarily. They're just seen together, and you can decide for yourself. Okay, is this a couple? Are they sisters? Are they, is it mother-daughter? And you can draw your own conclusion from that. And I find that troublesome.
Well, as we start to maybe wrap up, what are some things that people are thinking that you would like to get out? Do you think Butch is seen as bad in your generation?
I feel like, again, my perspective as someone who doesn't identify with the word, so I'm obviously not looking for the like sources like the one Kathleen mentioned. I feel like it's just not in the vocabulary, and I think my feeling towards all of it, I don't use the term either, but even when we're talking about the reclaiming of the Q word, again, it's like this notion of freedom and wanting more possibilities and nuance, and I feel like that's kind of where I see it. And like I said, those new categorizations of sport, lesbian, cottage core, whatever, it's just kind of a fun new experimentation with that sort of thing.
Yeah, I also feel kind of similarly that it's just not really a word in the general public consciousness or vocabulary very often. I feel by choosing to use those terms, which I feel now in my experience you choose to use them because they're not readily available, that by doing that you kind of are connecting to some sort of history or past or a legacy that is not seen as dead, but is seen as in decline. So I think like Butch isn't necessarily seen as negative, but I do definitely see in like mainstream representation, the acceptable lesbian woman is like a feminine woman.
Oh, so it's not even that she might be more butch appearing, but the word butch isn't used. It's that you think like it's more acceptable to kind
I
of
love the resurrection of the word feminist. It's been missing for so long. And I'm so happy to see younger women starting to use it again.
Yeah.
It was a dirty word, and it was for a while. It was.
I feel like it still
lesbian
is.
feminist, okay? It was not feminist, and it was not lesbian. It was lesbian feminist or lesbian feminist separatist. And it's so great to see the term feminist coming back into use in our vocabulary, and straight women young women starting to use it too. And really, really glad to hear that. I like that. And I don't think that butch has ever had the connotation. It's more of a community term, I think, within our community. Butch and femme are more terms used within our community. And the term that was derogatory in terms of when I was through the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, if you want to insult a lesbian, you called her a dyke with a sneer. And that was an issue we had to deal with because it was such a great word too. And you're trying to hang on to it and reclaim it and not have to give it up, and yet it was a slur, and so it was a real problem. And I'm so glad to see that coming back into use also.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the word dyke, and I think maybe part of why I struggled to label myself as lesbian is because generally seeing not a lot of great lesbian representation, and the most prominent place I've seen the word lesbian used is lesbian pornography, which is like, I don't want to associate with that. Like, and so I think like dyke, I think it's like a really bold and like political term that's obviously not that. It's really like short and sweet too, and it can fit. I have it on my my blacksmithing gloves because it fits on the knuckles. So yeah, I don't know. I just like the word dyke.
Dyke to me, it's interesting because I like it, but it's this kind of scary word. And I think for me, maybe it's because my experience of dyke has been mostly it being used negatively against people that I love. So to me, it's like maybe too scary that I wouldn't want to take it on. But, that's kind of, I think, for my own probably time period and stuff, too.
I think people who tried to save that word for us, well, there's dykes on bikes, but
yeah.
Alison Bechtel, the cartoonist,
yes,
wrote for decades a cartoon that, if anything, represented lesbians in all of their securities, all of their insecurities, all of their butchiness, their feminism, their employment, their unemployment, their successes, their failures, their love stories. And the title of the cartoon was Dykes to Watch Out For. And it was a wonderful, was and is a wonderful cartoon series, decades long. And I think she is one of the women who helped to save that term. Very, very definitely a positive influence in the term dyke.
When did that series start, do you think? Like in the 80s?
Yes, I think so.
Was it like 85?
Early 80s. It was weekly. I think she wrote it weekly.
Yes, she did.
The first I ever saw it was, of course, in the old outlines, which is today's Windy City Times, and it appeared in there for a number of years, and I don't know for how long actually. And she has a couple of other books too that she's written. That's the thing she's identified with the most is the cartoon series, and the women who she depicted in that series.
Yes. It's Bechdel. She's a graphic novelist now, but she had this series. It was in, I think, like the San Francisco Chronicle, but it was like, the gay one in the Bay Area for a long time. And it came out every week, starting pretty early. But one thing is, I know like Alison Bechtel, self-identifies as butch. But this cartoon series is really amazing, and it's now compiled into a book, so you can get the book Dykes to Watch Out For, and it has all of it. But I mean, it's like in the 80s, 90s, portraying what you were talking about, Lawson, like almost like array of things, of ways that people are lesbians. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, you know, there's not at all this like this or something. I mean, the people in those are, I mean, every single different type of person you can imagine. And they're talking about real stuff.
Different personalities, different classes, different races. She's got it all in there. Yeah.
Different approaches to body hair, different approaches to child rearing.
Yeah,
like, you know.
A couple of people who are always are showing body hair, and some who are going about that, and yeah, it's really great. Yeah.
But you're right, that's a really big one, and I wasn't aware of Alison Bechdel when I was kind of my earlier coming out. Like for me, it was the popular culture that was important to me was, you know, Melissa Etheridge. I wrote a paper in grad school, a term paper on Melissa Etheridge.
And what?
On Melissa Etheridge.
Oh, okay.
I wrote a term paper on her music because, of course, I was in the middle of trying to figure out who I was, and the paper was called Yes, I Am. All right. What are some final words?
Go gays.
Go gays.
Go gay.
I think we definitely figured out the meaning of life. So,
Definitely.
you know, we're done.
I think in terms of appearance, probably, Butch and Femme is here to stay, don't you think?
I hope so.
Except, I guess, the younger generations, it's not really a term, like a thing.
No, it's not a term necessarily, but the appearance.
I want to bring it back.
And
I'm with you, Kathleen.
although, as I said, there's more and more androgyny, and I'm jealous of that.
I love the androgyny too. I guess, I mean, the thing is, we talked about like this spectrum and, you know, all these different possibilities. And that's why you're right. Bechdel, I think that Dykes to Watch Out For was a really shift from like, even like Ellen or Melissa Etheridge or these sorts of people portray a certain type, but that you can be all these different types, you know, and be a lesbian. But I think within those, yeah, I hope Butch Femme won't go away, but it'll just keep changing. Because even when I was thinking about the history of it, like anything, like feminism or anything, has gone through waves in history. I think like even the history of just US kind of uses the word butch, like 40s, 50s, super different. And then it seems to be really peak and then it goes down, right? And I guess in the 70s with second wave feminism, I think it really took a hit. It was really uncool. And I think around when I was coming out, it came back. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Good
Frank.
to see you.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.